Welcome to creating callback functions. After watching this video, you should be able to create a callback function to intercept Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP method calls. As an asynchronous framework, Node.js makes extensive use of callback functions to return the result to the calling function. Node.js modules in the Software Development Kit, or SDK, pass an error object as the first parameter in a callback function. Here, the function is defined with an error as the first parameter. With this convention, the callback function checks if the first parameter holds an error object. If error is defined, the callback function handles the error and cleans up any open network or database connections. If the error is not defined, then the callback function examines the result from the call. If the error is defined, print the error message. Otherwise, the weather.current function call completed successfully. Print the result from the function call. The codes are in the main app, which has a weather object, the Node.js module, that calls the weather's current function. The location is an input parameter, in this example, an airport. To print temp_f in the browser, we can use response.end. The current weather reading is $temp_f degrees. Now we'll look at an example of passing an error object to the callback function. Recall how callback functions check the first parameter to see if an error condition occurred. Instead of printing the result in the console, you call the result callback function with the error object. You pass back the error object to the result callback function of the main application. If no error occurred, you can call the result callback function with null as the first parameter. The codes are in the custom Node.js module. The callback handler printed the contents of the HTTP response message body to the console. What if you wanted it to return the response message to the original calling application? If you use a return function, Node.js might call the callback function after the http.request call completes. The application calls the exported function. The module that implements the function calls http.request so that the Node.js framework can make a web service call on its behalf. When that request is sent successfully, the framework returns control to the Node.js module. Then the Node.js module returns control to the application. When the remote server sends back an HTTP response message to the Node.js framework, the framework calls the callback handler that was defined by the Node.js module. However, there is no connection between the callback function and the main application. So how do you link the callback function to the main application? The pattern is that when one Node.js application calls a module in a non-blocking manner, the application provides a callback function to process the result. If the main application calls http.request, it must provide a callback handler to process the HTTP response message. If the main application calls a function that calls http.request, there are two callback functions. The custom module has a callback function that handles the HTTP response message from http.request. And the main application has a callback function that processes the result captured in the first callback function. Let us see how this solution works. We will create a callback function to capture the result from the http.request function call. The application makes a call to the Node.js module. The Node.js module makes an http.request function call in order to send an HTTP request message to a remote server. Before the remote service returns an HTTP response message, the http.request function call returns control to the Node.js module as the request message was successfully sent. Then the Node.js module replies with a value to the main application. At a future point, the remote server sends back an HTTP response message. The Node.js framework calls the callback function defined by the Node.js module. This callback function calls another callback function defined by the main application. Having one callback function invoke another callback function is the only way to pass a message from the Node.js module to the main application when the Node.js module receives a response message. Here, when the main application calls weather.current, it passes an anonymous callback function to process the result from the call. In this case, the anonymous function takes in one input parameter, temp_f. The purpose of this callback function is to take the weather reading in degrees Fahrenheit and print the results in the console log. The result callback function in the function of the custom Node.js module links to the anonymous callback function temp_f of the weather object's current function in the main application. Now you can see a Node.js module that returns a result to the main application with a callback function. Here, a function is defined for the property named current. This property will be exported as part of the module. The anonymous function takes a parameter named result callback from the main application. This is how you pass a reference to the main application's callback function to the Node.js module's callback function. The result callback parameter stores the anonymous callback function from the main application. Look at the bottom of the current property. A response.onEnd event handler handles the transmission of the HTTP response message. When the remote server finishes sending back the response message, the code makes a call to result callback and passes it to the current weather reading in degrees Fahrenheit. This is how you pass a value from one callback handler to another. In this video, you learned that Node.js makes extensive use of callback functions to return the result to the calling function. Node.js modules in the SDK pass an error object as the first parameter in a callback function, and there is one callback function at each level.